My name's Cathy. I ride with the toughest gang of outlaw bikers in the state. You've heard of them. Gippo, Crazy John, Redbeard, Tampa. I've had them all, and ain't one of them ever gonna forget it, 'cause I'm one of the Hell's Bells on wheels. I fought every girl in the pack and beat them.
Hell's Bells, in color, starring Jeremy Slate, Adam Roarke, and Jocelyn Lane. This picture is rated M, suggested for mature audiences.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
I'm gonna kiss me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, Doctor, help me.
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're gonna make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first.
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Welcome to the American International Podcast. I'm Jeff Markin.
I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And on this episode, we are discussing Hell's Bells from 1969.
Hell's Bells was produced and directed by Maury Dexter and written by R.G. McMullen and James Gordon White. The movie stars Jeremy Slate as Dan, Adam Roarke as Tampa, Jocelyn Lane as Cathy, Angelique Pettyjohn as Cherry, William Lucking as Gippo, Michael Walker as Tony, Jerry Randell as Crazy John, Astrid Warner as Piper, and Kristin Van Buren as Zelda. It's a small cast.
I don't know who half those characters were.
Most of them don't matter.
Well, this film opens, as many do, with opening credits, and we see this over a montage of motorcyclists.
Yep, there's motorcycles. It looks like a race, and we are somewhere in the dusty desert location.
Yeah, we're looking at this race out of context as we're just dropping into the movie, and it reminded me a lot of the opening of Fast and the Furious, but it was motorcycles instead of cars.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarity there. We don't know who anybody is. We don't know where they're going or what they're racing for. I assume we'll find out.
Yeah, the disadvantage this movie had is that it didn't start with a fiery crash.
No, but it is in color, so that is an advantage.
So because this is a race, the race does have an end, and there is a guy at the end of the race with his checkered flag as the cyclists come up to the finish line.
Yep, and the prize for this race is a motorcycle. The winner is gifted a shiny new bike, a really nice one. It's hard for me to tell. I know nothing about motorcycles, and one looks much like any other, but he seems very happy to have won.
There was another character who is not so happy because he didn't win. This is Tony, and he's very upset with the outcome of the race.
Tony's kind of a gargoyle presence here. He's very bitter. He thinks he should have won, and his friends are kind of encouraging him by saying, well, that bike is available to the highest bidder.
The winner of the bike is Dan, and he is hoping to sell his new bike for $2,000.
Tony's going to lowball him, though. Tony's offer is his bike plus $300, and Dan's not interested. He just takes a pass and goes on his way. And his way involves hanging out with a lady friend in a cabin somewhere, and they apparently have a really good time. Afterwards, Dan stumbles off. He appears to be a little intoxicated. We're not on the highway here. We're just on some dusty desert roads. So he takes his truck and his bikes, and he just starts driving.
So as he's driving, he comes across a motorcycle and a body lying in the road.
Unlike me, who spotted this as the obvious trap it is, he stops and gets out to see what's happening.
He turns the body over and recognizes it as Tony, but before he can say or do anything, Tony bops him on the head with a rock in a sock.
Yeah, he cautious him good, and Dan falls over. He's out cold.
So Tony's buddies come out of the brush, and they offload the new bike from Dan's truck. Tony's buddies come out of the brush, and they offload the bike from Dan's truck.
They don't want to be pursued, so Tony and his friends decide to slash a couple of Dan's tires and to disable his motorcycle so that he can't ride after them should he come to right away. You hear the sound of air coming out of tires, and one of Tony's friends pulls the gas line out of the remaining functioning motorcycle, which causes the gas to kind of like spew out everywhere. They're stranding him, and the scenery out there it's just desert for miles and miles. There's no town nearby. There's nowhere to go. So they're really kind of sticking this guy in a very dangerous situation. This is Arizona, by the way. They're in the desert, in the middle of nowhere. So it really takes on a lot of meaning to just leave somebody there with nothing.
Sometime later, Dan awakens to find a Gila monster near him.
Yeah, the Gila monster is not really menacing him in any way. In fact, it appears to be walking backwards, away from him. It's not something that Dan needs to be worried about. He's got bigger concerns right now.
Right, and he looks over his truck and he sees that the bike is leaking gas. So he goes to fix that.
This takes a while. He's got a lot of repairs to do.
He notices the tires on his truck are slashed. So the bike is going to be his only means of transportation, but there's no fuel in it. So he has to siphon gas from his truck. So that takes some time.
It triggered my gag reflex to see him sucking gas out of his tank. It's just really gross because it gets in his mouth and he has to spit it out. And ugh.
Meanwhile, back in town, we are introduced to Tampa and his gang, and they're admiring Tony's new bike.
It's not Tony's. We know that, but Tony's not going to admit that. Tony and his friends come out of, what was it, a bar, a gas station, a restaurant. They come out to see that their bike is surrounded, and they're not happy about it.
Tony hops on his bike, and Tampa asks him to please get off his new sickle because he's just decided it's his just now.
Wow, you can do that?
He did.
I'm going to go to a Mercedes lot and just tell them that I just decided this is my new car and they can have my Kia.
Well, you can't just decide it, but Tampa's a decent guy, so he's going to make a trade just to keep it straight.
Well, what's he offering?
He's going to trade his old bike for Tony's new one.
Yes, this is not a mutually agreed upon trade, but it doesn't appear like Tony has a lot of choice because he and his friends are outnumbered. Tampa has a very large gang, and Tony is just there with his two buddies. But he still does try to fight it out.
But because they're so outnumbered, it's not long before Tony and his two buddies are quickly subdued.
Yeah, they're on the ground. They get knocked out. Poor Tony. Tony has a very punchable face, and the gang members take advantage of that.
So as he said he would, Tampa leaves his bike, and
he asks his old lady, Cherry, to get off the bike.
And he's going to make good on his trade with Tony. So he leaves that bike, takes Tony's, and they all head off into the desert.
There's about 10 men in this gang and a handful of women who are riding on the back of the motorcycles, and they all depart for who knows. We'll find out.
And it's around now that Dan shows up on the bike that he fixed, and he tells Tony that he wants his bike back. And Tony tells him what happened and that he was just crazy drunk and was going to return it in the morning. And Dan decks him and says, sure you would have.
I had the same sentiment.
Now, meanwhile, Tampa and his gang have set up camp for the night, and Tampa really loves his new bike.
He does. He's caressing it. He's kind of speaking lovingly to it.
Cherry's trying to convince him that she's better than the bike, and he's not so sure of it.
No, but she does eventually convince him that he can't have sex with the bike. That's an infallible argument, and they go off to do what they do. They're set up in the ruins of, it looks like a house. There's no roof, but there's walls. There's nobody there. It's all deserted. But this is their camp for the night.
Well, with everyone inside this building, such as it is, the bikes are left alone.
Everyone's asleep or passed out at this point.
And Dan is clear to take back what is rightfully his.
He tries anyways. Goes up to his bike. I think he's not trying to start it. He's just trying to move it away. But he's spotted by Gippo. Gippo's a big guy, kind of a dumb face, and he thinks it's Tampa because he's on the opposite side of the bike from Dan, and he thinks Tampa is out there just addressing his bike or is out there saying sweet nothings to his bike. But Gippo gets the surprise of his life when it turns out to be Dan, who smashes a rock into his face.
Then Dan hops on his bike, and Gippo tries to knock him off with this big stick. Dan's riding around. He's not really trying to get away with it, so I'm not sure what his motive here, but he goes inside the building, and it's there that Tampa successfully knocks him off the bike like swatting a fly, he says. Then Tampa accuses Dan of trying to steal his bike.
Yes, all this confusion over who actually owns this bike. This is the crux of the movie. You could have called it The Wayward Motorcycle, and it would have been a better title.
At this point in the film, I was thinking this is what the movie was going to be. It was going to be the adventures of this motorcycle passing from person to person.
I think that would have been a better movie.
And it was the first indication to me that the title Hell's Bells might not have been appropriate for this film.
Yes, it is a bit of a misnomer, as we will find out. Tampa is extremely concerned about his bike. He speaks to this bike more lovingly than he probably has any human being over the course of his entire life. Gippo, however, is concerned about getting revenge.
And Tampa acknowledges that this may have been Dan's bike at one time, but it's been through a lot since then, and he did a valid swap for it, in his mind anyway. So the bike rightfully belongs to Tampa.
Yes, I believe that is the finders keepers doctrine. That is impossible to challenge in court of law.
Dan isn't taking this news well because he still feels the bike should be his.
Well, it should be. He's not wrong.
So Tampa is going to let Gippo get even, and that happens.
It's not really a fair fight.
As Dan keeps running into his fists.
Yeah, Tampa really is great at assigning blame to everyone else. It's never his fault. It's not Gippo's fault. Two guys hold Dan while Gippo pummels him. It's not a fair fight, and Dan gets knocked to the ground. He can't really do anything. All these guys are surrounding him. He says that they should probably kill him because he's not going to give up on getting this bike.
Tampa says he didn't know the bike was stolen when he acquired it, but they're going to make it up to him.
With another bike?
Better.
What could be better than another bike?
They give him a woman.
Oh, I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah, they had this leftover woman that they weren't really using, so they offer up Cathy as a trade.
Yeah, I guess in this gang, women are currency. Their value is the same as one brand new shiny motorcycle. Cathy is Jocelyn Lane. She's a very beautiful woman. She really looks out of place here. She's impeccably dressed. She doesn't look like a dusty biker hobo like everyone else does. And she's not happy about being traded to this guy, as you can imagine.
No, she feels betrayed.
Well, who wouldn't? I don't know if we get the sense at this point that she's Tampa's woman, or she was. We find out the backstory later. You get the sense here that Cathy is being dumped by Tampa. Like they were together. Maybe they aren't right now, but at some point they were, and now he's just dumping her on this stranger. She looks very hurt at this. She doesn't want to go with Dan, but they throw her on top of him and they all ride away.
So after a short while, Dan questions her as to where the gang might be going because he needs to follow them and get that bike back.
Yep, that is job one. His job only, really. The only thing on his mind. She tells them that they're going to Nogales, which is just over the Mexican border. Where this movie is shot, it's sort of north of Tucson, Arizona. I don't get out a map and you can see where it is. But there's a good distance between that location and Nogales. So this is going to be a long chase.
Dan goes over to the stream for a quick drink while Cathy watches, and they bicker a little bit about their predicament, and Dan says that he'll be getting rid of her first town they come to. He revs up his bike, she hops on the back.
She has no choice.
And the sign that we see as they ride off says Mammoth, 42 miles.
Yep, that's a real place. So if you, like I said, you can keep track of their progress here.
And I'm not sure how much time has passed since Tampa and his gang left, but they appear to already be at Mammoth, and they've stopped at a service station.
I can imagine that all those bikes need a lot of gas, especially when you're out driving in the middle of nowhere in the 60s. There's not a gas station like every 20 miles like there is now. So they all need to fill up. But instead, they decide to engage in horseplay.
Cherry has Gippo check out the pump that she says is giving her a problem, and he looks at it, and as he does so, one of the other guys releases the gas, which squirts him in the face.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
Revenge seems to be what motivates most of Gippo's actions, so he's going after the guy who released the gas in his face, and he squirts gas all over him.
The attendant comes out. All gas stations had attendants who were supposed to pump your gas for you back then. He doesn't want these guys goofing around with his gas pumps. He tries to take control of the situation and do all the pumping himself, but it's kind of too late because they are in total destructive mode right now. And the next thing you know, somebody's lit a cigarette and has thrown it into some of the pooled gasoline on the ground.
And with that, the station goes up in flames, and that's the cue for Tampa and his gang to skedaddle.
Right, and they didn't all get gas, so that's kind of important to remember. They had, but they do not want to get arrested, so I guess that's the primary consideration here. So the attendant works to put out the fire.
So as the fire is being extinguished, Dan and Cathy ride up and see what's going on. The attendant recognized them as bikers, so obviously they were involved with the incident.
That's profiling, I would say. All bikers don't necessarily cause fires at gas stations. But they don't want to stick around and argue the point. They decide that they should take off as well. So the chance he had to get rid of Cathy, lost.
And now we find ourselves in a small town store, and a couple of Tampa's gang are in there harassing the clerk.
Yeah, I was going to say shopping, but they're really just being jerks.
One of them goes to the back, and as he does so, Dan walks in. He recognizes them.
He saw their bikes outside, so he knew that he had found a couple of the gang.
So he jumps one and questions him as to where the rest of the gang is.
Yep, they're at the Mesquite Road cutout.
And Cathy is tired of waiting outside, so she goes in, and she's instantly recognized.
But it doesn't matter because these two guys, I think, get taken out at this point. There's a fight. The shopkeeper gets upset.
There's some collateral damage. The store gets a little messed up.
Right. Dan pays for groceries. It was the stuff that the gang members were buying at the time, and takes off with them. And then Dan tells the shop owner if he wants to get paid for damages, that those guys will take care of it. So he goes outside where Cathy's kind of standing in a huff. She doesn't want to go with him. She throws the groceries on the ground.
Dan says he's going to be taking her back to the gang.
She doesn't want to go, but I think he has to trade her back in order to get the bike. I think that he can't just come back empty-handed. So I think that's why she must go with him in his mind.
So over where Tampa's gang is camping out. The women folk are gathered around and having some girl talk and talking about Cathy.
They don't like her.
They're not fans, no.
Especially Cherry, who I believe has assumed her position as Tampa's old lady in Cathy's absence. And I think that makes her kind of like the queen of the hive here. She threatens one of the other women, saying that she could also get traded away if she doesn't watch her step.
And this is where we learn that the gang only has so far that they can go because they weren't all able to fill up when they were at the service station before the fire broke out.
Whose fault is that?
And they also can't use the main highways because they're wanted because of the fire that broke out.
You're heading in a canyon. It's very far from the road. You can't see anything unless you're actually looking over and down there.
And to make it to Nogales, they're going to have to strictly use back roads.
Which I think... I don't know. It seems like every road in this movie is a back road. If you ever wanted to feel what it's like to get lost in the desert in Arizona, this is a great movie for you. So I guess they're trying to make the best of it. They're having dinner, which is beans on a tin plate. And Gippo's eating, but mysteriously, rocks keep falling into his food.
And no one will cop into putting the rocks in his food. So he just starts fighting because he needs revenge.
He's not a bright guy. He's either in stupid mode or he's in fight mode. But actually Dan appears to take responsibility for the rocks and to threaten everyone, saying that he wants his bike back. He's really not going to give up on this one message.
He's returning the merchandise that he was traded, and he expects a full refund. But a swap's a swap, so there's not much he can do. So with his limited options, he just kicks dirt on them.
Oh, yeah. He looks like a spoiled kid.
It works because they're worried he's going to ruin the bike, so they retreat.
Yeah, they all run away. He's just literally kicking rocks and dust down the side of this canyon, and it chases them all off.
Cathy starts ragging on him for his immature behavior.
And rightly so. I mean, she's not wrong. I mean, she has been very wronged here. You could say she's nagging at him, but it's totally understandable.
He's ready to go and start chasing them again, but she's refusing to go. She's just going to stay there. He starts regaling her with tales of Gila monsters and rattlesnakes.
Oh, right. As we've seen, the Gila monster didn't really do anything to him, so I don't know where he's getting his information from. I suspect he's making it up.
He does tell a story of a guy he saw that was bitten by a rattlesnake and how quickly it killed him and how painful it looked.
And gruesome, too. It's like he's swelled up and it was just awful.
And this is enough for her to reconsider her position, so she gets on the back of the bike, though she's not happy about it.
No, because before he told her that story, he decided to kind of wrestle with her and even spanked her. And it doesn't sit well, but this sort of physical altercation between them, not great. I'm glad he resorted to this story instead of taking it further.
Now, Dan knows this area like the back of his hand, so he's definitely going to take advantage of that.
Every area looks the same. There's not one scene in this movie that doesn't look like every other scene in this movie. But I guess we have to take Dan's word for it that he knows one gully, ditch, patch of scrub from another.
Well, he does know where a big rock is, so he's constructed a plan worthy of Wile E. Coyote.
Yeah, it's a giant boulder, just like you'd expect from a cartoon scene. He's got a stick. He's trying to lever it under this immense boulder, which is at the top of a hill, and going to roll the boulder down and smush them as you would a roadrunner. Beep, beep.
Now, Tampa and his gang are approaching, and they can't ride. I don't know if they're on a gas at this point, but they're hand-wheeling their bikes through this crevasse.
I thought that maybe the roads were too rocky to ride over. They're basically on sand at this point. They're not on a road. It's either the fact that they have no gas or that there is no road, but they're not riding, they're walking.
Anyway, Dan successfully starts a small avalanche and blocks their path.
Now they're trapped. They're trapped in this gully, and there's only one way out. I guess they can't go back the way they came, so they need to drag their bikes up the side of the gully to the surface level.
To the top of the ridge.
Yeah, to the top of the ridge.
They start wheeling their bikes upward.
It's a big struggle because it takes everybody just to get 2 bikes up to the top. And then they have to go back down to get the rest of them.
They get the first 2 up and they have several more to go. So they head back down.
And Dan's up there.
And Dan checks out the bikes, but neither one is the one he's looking for.
He chucks one down the side of the ditch where it mows over one of the gang members.
And this gang member is injured pretty badly, so he has to be taken to the hospital.
They take one of the working bikes, and he and his old lady ride back to town. They're going to take the risk and drive back on the road where they might get picked up by the police, but it's worth it because he's really hurt.
Right. He has to get to the hospital, but they know that they just can't talk about anything that's happened once they're there.
You never rat out your tribe. That's a given. The rest of the gang has to struggle to get the motorcycles up the ridge.
Now, Dan knows of an abandoned mining shack nearby, so he takes Cathy there.
He wants to loot it for supplies. It doesn't really appear to have a whole lot in it. But while he's looking around, Cathy's just cringing in the corner because it's filthy and it's probably full of spiders.
She asked if he's taking her home to meet his mother.
Unless he's got like Norman Bates' mom. Probably not.
And in the corner, she sees what she believes to be a snake.
It's a coiled loop of something. And we know it's a rope.
It's so obviously a rope.
Yeah. Well, we have a better angle than she does, I guess.
And Dan obviously knows it's a rope, so he goes over to wrestle with it a little bit. But he's overcome by this rope.
Yeah, he puts on this pantomime of being attacked by a snake, and she believes it for a second, and then she realizes what's going on. She calls him a miserable crud, and then she starts crying.
But Dan doesn't care. He has fun.
You gotta amuse yourself when you're out in the desert.
So Dan starts gathering supplies. He finds a stick of dynamite.
And a fuse.
And some more rope.
And he gathers it all together. So then the next day, we're back in the same gully, another gully. It's impossible to tell. Everything looks the same. But Tampa and his gang are at the bottom and Dan's at the top. So Dan has engineered this. He's the bait and he's leading all of them, some of them, into a trap.
A couple bikers follow.
It's a long chase.
And he's set up a rope around a couple of trees and he leads them into this and they get clotheslined.
One of the bikes goes to pieces, and they're both hurt. I think the other bike is okay, though.
Meanwhile, Cathy has taken off on the bike that Dan was using and left him there.
She's all, so long, sucker, and then she's out of there. But now Dan has a problem. He has one really badly injured guy that he injured, to be fair, and one motorcycle between him, the not-so-injured guy, and the really hurt guy. And so Dan takes off on the motorcycle to go wrangle Cathy and that motorcycle back.
She goes down a ravine and seemingly loses him. But because Dan knows this area like the back of his hand, he manages to cut her off.
And knock her down.
And he tells her that they need to take one of the bikes back because the two injured men are going to need transportation because they need to get to a doctor.
She doesn't really understand because he injured them. So isn't he happy that they're injured? And now he's got an advantage. He's got another bike that he can have. But I guess Dan's a better man than that.
She picks up the bike and goes to take off, but he smacks her in the rear again.
Yeah, I guess that's his go-to. He treats her like a child, and it's gross. But it works.
It works. And they both return to the injured fellas, and Dan helps patch them up and
ties up a splint for the broken arm.
And even gives them directions to town.
Yeah, he's a real swell guy.
And Cathy just can't believe what she's seeing.
No, but one good thing for Dan is that he's really paring down the size of Tampa's gang here. So another two guys are out of the picture.
Dan is formulating another plan. So he takes the gas tank from the busted bike.
And Dan and Cathy have a little moment where they talk about their respective backstories. Dan has a ranch and he wants to sell the bike to pay off some of his debt so he can start making a profit at his ranch. He has to do that this year.
And Cathy had been accused of cheating. She started messing around with another guy to make Tampa jealous.
Well, she didn't really mess around with him, but she led everyone to believe that she did. However, Cherry lied and said that they really did do it.
The other fellow was drummed down on the gang, and Cathy became a free agent within the gang.
When you say free agent, it means that every guy got to use her whether she wanted to be with them or not. Really, really gross. However, despite all that, mysteriously, she does still love Tampa, and she wishes she could be with him.
Now, the rest of Tampa's gang is wondering what happened to the two fellows who rode off. Now the gang's down to 5, not including the women.
And then that doesn't make them happy. They notice that their numbers are dwindling too, and it's all over a stupid bike. So they're not happy about this.
No, one of them suggests that they just give the cowboy his bike back, but Tampa won't even consider that. He really loves his bike.
Yeah, he's really invested in this. He's not going to give up without a fight.
So Dan parks his bike, tells Cathy that if he's not back in an hour, that Cathy is free to take it. He gives her directions to town, and Tampa has a plan to catch the cowboy.
Yeah, Tampa can set up traps too, by the way.
What they're going to do is they're going to place all the bikes in a circle and put the desired bike in the center and then set up a snare trap. Then zoom.
I think both parties in this movie have watched way too many Looney Tunes cartoons. But nothing, as you might expect, this does not go according to plan.
No, because Dan is making his own trap. He's building a bomb with the fuel tank he borrowed and the dynamite.
And one stick of dynamite.
And he sets it off, and the explosion works as a great distraction.
I wondered why he didn't just throw it down into the gang.
He didn't want to damage his bike.
They weren't by his bike. They were sleeping off to the side. Well, I know he doesn't really want to kill people, but he really could have solved this whole movie right then and there by throwing a bomb on Tampa. But anyway, now in the confusion, there's a lot of running around.
But Tampa's of the mind that he's going to try and outsmart Dan. So he tells Gippo that they'll separate, go separate directions, and try to surround him when he comes for the bike.
We don't see how it happens, but Gippo manages to get himself stuck in the snare trap. There's a rope around his ankle. He's hanging over the ground. It's all kind of embarrassing for him.
Gippo was there, and he's not sure how it happened either.
It's kind of funny, actually.
Dan sees that this isn't the time to go for the bike, so he goes back to Cathy. Not until after he's had time to destroy their camp.
He starts a a brush fire, which is a great thing to do in the desert. Thanks, Dan.
Tampa thinks they'll be better off moving to higher ground because...
Well, low ground isn't doing them any favors so far.
Not at all. So that evening, Cathy asked Dan what would happen if he wasn't able to get his bike back. And this is something that Dan never even considered as an option.
It's just not. They do have a moment, though. It looks like Cathy's cold and she wants to be held. So they have a little cuddle and even a kiss. And they kind of bed down together. Whether they actually have sex, we don't know. But there definitely was some snuggling.
Next morning, the gang is looking for signs of the cowboy. And Gippo is missing.
Yeah, he's wandered off like a toddler, a giant toddler. So they decide they need to go find where he is. They're not going to leave him behind.
Dan awakens. He covers up Cathy and starts wheeling the bike away.
He's going on a scouting mission. He doesn't have his bike back. He's got to go back and try something else.
And Cathy woke up and he told her all this. They both agree that Cathy should just wait there.
Now we're back at the gang camp. Tampa wants a war council, whatever that means, but we can't do it without Gippo, so we got to find him. And Dan has overheard this.
But nobody wants to look for Gippo.
They think he's back at the old camp. They don't want to go back to where they were camping the night before. But it has to be done. Dan has overheard this. He sneaks off. I don't know where he's going, but he ends up back at his own camp where Gippo has surprised Cathy and has her at knife point.
And Gippo says he's going to slit her throat, but Dan says he doesn't care.
Yeah, go ahead and cut that slut's throat. I don't care. As you can imagine, that doesn't thrill Cathy to hear that.
And it confuses Gippo because that's not the kind of reaction he was expecting.
Right. The bluff works. He lets Cathy go.
And Dan goads Gippo into fighting him.
This is kind of a funny fight, too, even though it's got a bit of a tragic ending. They start rolling down another hill into another cavern, I guess.
Well, the best part is the Foley work. All the sound effect is done at like 1,000%. And it's just so amusing to see people rolling around and hearing the ground crunch beneath them.
It's like you're there. Down at the bottom of this cavern, we see 2, 3 rattlesnakes. There's a bunch.
And they're closest to Gippo, and Gippo is the victim. He gets bitten by a rattlesnake.
What a dummy. And then he dies.
Dan returns to Cathy. They embrace. And what's left of Tampa's gang is riding. They're still looking for Gippo. They don't know what's happened.
We don't know what's happened. Well, we kind of do. So now it's time for the final showdown.
Dan is watching and waiting. He rides toward them and dumps off Gippo's body.
And he takes off. Now the gang is upset. Obviously, they thought they were going to find Gippo alive, and they did not.
Well, Tampa especially takes it hard. He yells out that he's going to kill Cowboy. And Cowboy yells back that it was an accident.
Yeah, it was a rattlesnake that did it, and to check the body. And the other gang members do, and they can see the marks of a snake bite, the swelling, whatever it is that indicates a death by rattlesnake.
But Tampa doesn't care. He's going to kill the cowboy anyway.
I think it was always going to come down to this. Where they are positioned is sort of a road coming up the middle of the scene with a sharp decline on one side and a body of water on the other side. So they've got this sort of tournament area here, like a jousting path. I don't know how to describe it better than that, but basically there's nowhere else to go but face each other down on either side of this road.
Now they all realize that their numbers have been dwindling at an alarming rate. This is the first casualty that we know of. But Cherry feels enough is enough, and she yells at Dan to give him his bike back.
She even tries to do it herself.
And Tampa says absolutely not.
Cherry tries to take the bike back. Tampa slaps her and knocks her down.
Dan's watching all this from his hiding place and says, Cathy, come look. All hell's breaking loose down there.
He's hopping around like an angry little man, like a little Yosemite Sam.
But Cathy doesn't want to look. She wants to confront Dan about the things he said about her when she was at knife point with Gippo.
Yeah, she thought they had something, and he called her a slut and a whore and told a guy to slash her throat. She's a little miffed.
He tells her that he was bluffing, doing that to protect her.
And it worked.
And she begs him to forget about the bike and just go away with her and start fresh.
But we know that's not going to happen. So we're back over at Tampa's camp, and everyone else is ready to defect. They've had it.
Yeah, Tampa says he has a new plan, but they don't want to hear it. They leave him alone with his brand new bike.
Even Cherry is done humiliating herself for him.
So Tampa has a makeshift funeral for Gippo and
buries him under a pile of rocks. Very Old West. He reminisces about their past as degenerate lowlifes here.
So now that Tampa's alone, he realizes it's time for a face-off.
The final battle.
Tampa says that Dan can have the bike over his dead body.
Well, let's start making that happen, because I'm really getting tired of this movie at this point. Tampa is going to set the terms of the fight, because up until now, he's just been on the defense. He's ready to go on the offense. He's got 2 big chains, and he throws one to Dan and tells him to pick it up.
The winner gets the bike, and Cathy.
Should they want her?
Dan tells Cathy to get off the bike. He picks up the chain. Cathy shouts at him, don't do it, don't do it.
But it's going to get done.
So now they just ride past each other, swinging their chain several times and apparently missing several times.
The weird thing is that Tampa is going across his body, Even when they pass on the right, he's not using his good hand. He's going across his body to slap at him with the chain. It just seems really inefficient way to fight. I mean, I don't know a lot about jousting, and I know even less about jousting with chains on motorcycles, but it seems really inefficient the way they're doing it.
Eventually, Tampa does get a good hit in and sends Dan down the hill, but he's able to recover and gets back on the road.
He doesn't get on his bike. He's not able to get up and fight with the chain again.
So Tampa sees this as his invitation to mow him down. He tries to do so, but he winds up airborne and whiffs the landing.
He does it like Evel Knievel style. It doesn't seem like he should be that injured, but apparently he is bad off.
And because he's so bad off, he's really, really sorry. He asks Cathy for help, and he declares his love.
Oh, God. And why she didn't just turn and walk away right there, I don't understand. It's obviously BS.
It obviously is, but she still wants to help him.
She does get on the back of Dan's motorcycle. They ride off. The credits start. If you turned off the TV right now, you'd think that that was a happy ending. However, that's not the end of the movie.
Well, Cathy wants to help him. Dan has his bike, so he's not interested, and Cathy reminds Dan that Tampa's injured because that seemed to work in the case of the other people he injured.
But not with Tampa. Dan could not care less.
There's still a bike there, and he can ride it if he wants to badly enough.
Well, Tampa is the reason that they had to come to this in the first place. So it makes sense to leave him to save himself. However, at this point, Cathy betrays herself and all womankind by getting off Dan's motorcycle and walking back towards Tampa.
And thus ends the movie.
Dan rides off into the sunset or whatever, and the credits roll.
You are listening to the American International Podcast, where we're discussing Hell's Bells from 1969.
We look at that cast. We see a lot of AIP players here. Jeremy Slate had been in the Miniskirt Mob and would later appear in Hell's Angels 69.
Adam Roarke had previously appeared in Hell's Angels on Wheels, Psych Out, and The Savage Seven, and would later appear in A Bullet for Pretty Boy, which would also feature Jocelyn Lane.
He's really the go-to biker guy, I think, for AIP. Angelique Pettyjohn, who was Cherry, was in The Mad Doctor of Blood Island as well. Let's talk about this title, Jeff. Why is it called Hell's Bells?
That's a very good question. I had never seen this film before, and based on the title, what I got was not what I expected at all.
I'm going to read to you some of the taglines for this movie, and they're all equally misleading. I tried to sell this movie as being about Cathy, when it really wasn't. So the taglines were, the bikes were fast, she was faster, or the roughest ride in town, meaning her, or a mean set of wheels and a chick to match, the debutante in a leather skirt. We don't know if she was a debutante. They don't give us any kind of history of how she ended up in the gang. And they say she's a chick with an itch for action. Too young, too tough, too itching for action to look for it. She'll make it where she is. Now, this movie is not about her. She barely features into it. She might as well be a piece of luggage.
Well, they treat her like a piece of luggage, that's for sure.
Dan and Tampa just pass her back and forth like she's an inanimate object. This movie was released on a double bill with a movie called The Wild Eye, which was an Italian film. And later on, it was reissued and released with The Cycle Savages in 1970. And one thing about the plot of this movie is, like I said, it's not about Cathy. It's about the motorcycle. And they kind of borrowed the plot from a movie called Winchester 73, which was a Jimmy Stewart Western about a gun that keeps being passed around from person to person.
I like the story here. I can't say I'm exactly thrilled with the execution. And definitely not thrilled with the title, but I'm not sure what I would have called this. What do you think an alternate title would be for this film?
Like I said earlier in the podcast, I would call it The Wayward Motorcycle, because it really is just about this chopper. What would you call it?
I really have no idea, but I guess of those two choices, Hell's Bells was probably the better title for getting people into seats, even if it was misleading.
Oh, yeah. I mean, The Wayward Motorcycle would never have worked in 1969. So this was part of AIP's sort of biker movie, anti-establishment movie genre. Getting close to the end here, though. It started with The Wild Angels, which we covered in another podcast. And it basically the whole thing petered out in 1971, and they stopped doing these kinds of movies. Les Baxter did the music for this movie, and it's kind of fun. There's a bit of whimsy in the scene where Gippo is getting strung up by the trap. We hear this sort of like silent movie music playing in the background, and I really enjoyed some of the songs that were playing. You can actually get the album on iTunes or wherever you get music. It's kind of fun. The score and the soundtrack are some of the more enjoyable parts of this movie.
After directing Jocelyn Lane in this film, Maury Dexter would go on to direct her in A Bullet for Pretty Boy after he was hired as a replacement director for that picture. He had also directed The Miniskirt Mob, Mary Jane, and The Young Animals. Both of those films, Hell's Bells was the last film he ever directed, for which he was the actual credited director of the entire film.
Yeah, he went on to do Little House on the Prairie episodes after this, and basically some TV production. And the screenwriter for this was James Gordon White, who did a lot of AIP movies, including The Glory Stompers in 1967, Miniskirt Mob, Young Animals in 68, The Devil's Eight in 69, and in the future, The Incredible Two-Headed Transplant and The Thing with Two Heads in 1971 and 1972. I always suspected that those movies had something in common aside from the same plot, so they have the same writer. So Jeff, let's rate this movie. How would you grade it on our AIP scale?
Well, after the initial shock when the movie didn't match the title at all, and I sat back and watched and examined this film, it's a pretty silly movie. There's a lot of goofiness going on, including the soundtrack, which gets goofy at times in a fun way. The Wile E. Coyote gags, I don't know if that's intentional or not, but you can't miss it.
No, you can't. It's very cartoonish.
And a lot of what I assume are unintentional laughs. So I don't think it's a movie I could take all that seriously. Mm-mm. I enjoyed it well enough. It's not one that I will revisit many times in the future, I don't think. I'm going to give it an I on our AIP scale, where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic.
I agree with you that it deserves an I. One thing I did really like is Jocelyn Lane as Cathy. I think the movie really did her dirty. Her character didn't get developed that well, and her motivations. The movie's supposedly about her, and yet it tells us almost nothing about her, and she has no agency at all in this movie. However, I really like the actress, and her portrayal made me want to know her better. Obviously, this movie really fell short on that, but I did enjoy her performance. And like you said, it's silly and fun. I love movies where the stakes are like super low, and yet the damage is really high regardless. I mean, this is just a fight over a motorcycle, and all these people were injured and one even died. So I appreciate those kinds of movies. So I'll also give it an I. Can't say that I would definitely tell everyone to go out and watch this, but if, like us, you were forced to watch it via a random movie generator selection, you could do worse.
So I think that's going to wrap up our episode on Hell's Bells.
I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And I'm Jeff Markin.
And until next time,
we'll meet you at the drive-in. Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd at AIP_pod, and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.